This production is dedicated to all the victims, including those who never got to tell their stories, all those who had their rights violated and are still waiting for justice, all those who had their rights violated and passed away before getting justice, everyone who never stopped striving for justice, accountability, and all the women who took action one way or the other, the women at the front lines, the women who held down the fort when their loved ones were missing, detained, disappeared, the ones who continued to fight for justice. Your stories will not stay untold. In 1994, junior officers and lieutenants of the Gambia National Army, namely 2nd Lieutenant Edward Singate, Lieutenant Sana Sabali, Lieutenant Basiru Barra, 2nd Lieutenant Alpha Kinte, 2nd Lieutenant Sadibu Haidara, and 2nd Lieutenant Alhaji Kante, led by Lieutenant Yaya Jammeh, staged a coup d'etat that overthrew the democratically elected government of Sir Dawda Kairaba Jawara and formed the Armed Forces and Provisional Ruling Council AFPRC junta. The junta claimed to be soldiers with a difference, yet in 1996, they took off their uniforms and contested for elections under the Alliance for Patriotic Reorientation and Construction APRC party and proceeded to stay in power until 2016 with Yaya Jammeh as the president and head of state. The 22-year regime of Yaya Jammeh in the Gambia was marked by widespread human rights violations, including forced disappearances, extrajudicial killings, torture, rape, and arbitrary arrest and detentions. Yaya Jammeh sought exile in Equatorial Guinea in January 2017 after losing the December 2016 presidential election to main opposition coalition candidate Adama Barrow. After coming into power, the new government sought to set the country on a new democratic course with the establishment of a transitional justice process with transitional justice mechanisms that include the Constitutional Review Commission, institutional reforms, and the Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations Commission, with the enacting into law of the TRRC Act 2017.
The National Assembly mandated the Commission to investigate and establish an impartial record of the nature, causes, and the extent of violations and abuses of human rights committed during the period July 1994 to January 2017 in order to, quote, promote healing and reconciliation, respond to the needs of the victims, address impunity, and prevent repetition of the violations and abuses suffered by making recommendations for the establishment of appropriate preventive mechanisms, including institutional and legal reforms. Establish and make known the fact or whereabouts of disappeared victims. Provide victims an appropriate and opportunity to relate their own accounts of the violations and abuses suffered, and finally grant reparations to victims in appropriate cases.
The TRRC hearings ran from 7th January 2019 to 28th May 2021, and from the beginning, the Commission's commitment to public hearings set it apart from other truth-seeking exercises. Each public testimony was broadcasted on TV and streamed live on social media for Gambians and international actors to follow. The Commission also provided interpretation in various local languages and, in some instances, interpretation for non-Gambian witnesses. These arrangements ensured that Gambians across the world could actively follow and participate in the transitional justice process, reflecting a widespread movement for change. 871 days of testimonies covering some of the darkest periods in Gambian history were broadcasted live on television and in real time through social media. Over the course of 2.5 years, the Commission heard from 392 witnesses, which included victims, perpetrators, and expert witnesses. Hundreds of people were adversely mentioned during the testimonies. We found the following people to be the top 20 mentioned persons, based on number of times they were mentioned, gravity of crimes alleged, and their command responsibility. They include members of the AFPRC junta led by Yaya Jammeh, Vice President Aissatou Saidi, former cabinet ministers, former heads of security services, and the junglers or Black. The next segment of this video highlights some of the most notable incidents, human rights violations, and crimes perpetrated against Gambians and non-Gambians during the 22 years of Yaya Jammeh's authoritarian rule. The Night of Terror. Witnesses testified to severe torture and mock executions meted out on then Deputy Inspector General of Police Beria Chongan, Captain Mamet Ocham, and RSM Babar Malik Jeng on September 6, 1994 by Sana Sabali, Sadibu Haidara, Edward Singate, Yankuba Toure, Peter Singate, and their orderlies.
All those rules of prisons were violated, that access were being done against you, that the prison is facilitating such an access at this time, and that people are being dragged out, tortured, beaten, and then executed. It was just something else.
It has left an indelible mark in my head here that I may forgive, but I will never ever forget the night of September 6th, which we have dubbed as Night of the Terror.
November 11th, 1994, coup attempt. On November 11th, 1994, Sana Sabali, Edward Singate, Sadibu Haidara, Yankuba Toure, Peter Singate, and their orderlies participated in the summary execution of at least 12 soldiers accused of plotting a counter-coup against the junta. The mass killings were witnessed by then Army Commander Babukar Jatta. Seven human remains, believed to be that of some of the soldiers executed on November 11, 1994, were exhumed from Yundum Barracks in 2019. At the time of publishing this video, the remains are yet to be identified due to the government's lack of capacity and resources. The 1995 unlawful killing of Usman Koro Sise, former Minister of Finance and Trade. The brutal and gruesome murder of Usman Koro Sise, a civilian who was the then finance minister appointed by the junta, was said to have been carried out at the Yankuba Toure's house by Edward Singate, Yankuba Toure, and Peter Singate, assisted by some of their orderlies on June 24, 1995. Being a man of honor and integrity committed to the transformational development of his country, it is believed that Koro's progressive ideologies threatened the new direction of Jammeh and the junta members, thus the need to eliminate him.
We were there up to sometimes. Then, Peter is the first person who arrived. He came, parked his car, and rose inside the house. Inside the house, hiding somewhere else. Because I didn't follow him there. He just passed me at the gate, telling me that they are coming. So he entered inside the house. In the next 5 minutes time, I saw Edward Yankuba with a civilian. that may be a civilian rather. No. So when Edward entered, he said, "That's the minister." That's the time I know this man is a minister. I salute.
Did you know his name?
They said Korosisi. I later know him as Korosisi, Usman Korosisi.
And you saluted?
I saluted him. Shake hands, sir. Welcome, sir. So okay. Then Edward lead. I followed him, and the minister was following me, coming inside the house. As we are entering, I just hear the noise, whip, whip, two struck, and the dumb man fell down. As surprise attack at the back, I also take a step forward. That's the Edu turned to me. That is the guy. There was like what they used to palm the pepper in the local language, kuda, kanturang. That's what Edu take and hit.
Pistol in English, pur in Wolof. That's it?
Hit him for the third stroke. Everywhere was blood. And near him, there was a firewood stick where he picked and gave it to me, for me also to hit. I also hit. Then Yankuba took the stick from Peter, and he also hit. And he called the rest of the people. We all hit. The man died.
1996 UDP incident and other attacks on political opponents. The junta took off their uniforms and formed the Alliance for Patriotic Reorientation and Construction political party in 1996 and launched a campaign to persecute members of the opposition parties and perceived political opponents, to intimidate and instill fear in them. The PPP, NCP, and GPP were banned from contesting the 1996 election, and on 22nd September 1996, United Democratic Party UDP supporters were attacked by over 50 armed soldiers led by Yankuba Toure, Edward Singate, and Almamo Mane at Denton Bridge when the UDP supporters were returning from a nationwide campaign.
And he had been, or allegedly, kidnapped by 4 men. His actual story was 4 NIA, but I'm just saying 4 men. 3 of them pinned him down against a wall. The 4th one came, tore his trousers off, exposed his penis, and put a lighter flame on his glans. The glans is the tip of the penis, the fleshy part, not the skin part. He said, "Doctor, I have never experienced any pain like that in my entire life."
April 10th and 11th student demonstration. On April 10th and 11th in 2000, students came out to demonstrate against the torture that led to the death of 15-year-old Ibrahim Abari, a grade 10 student at Foster's Technical Senior Secondary School, at the hands of fire service officer, and the rape of Binta Mane, a grade 7 student from Brikamaba, by a security officer. At least 13 students were killed, as well as 1 Red Cross volunteer, Omar Barrow, and 2 3-year-old children. 2 other individuals were arrested, detained, and allegedly tortured in Janjanbureh prison, also died shortly after their release, raising the death toll at the hands of Gambian security forces to 18. Several students with serious and permanent injuries requiring overseas treatment. A witness, Lalo Karamo Jaita, a former lieutenant and aide-de-camp to the then president, alleged that Yahya Jammeh, who was in Cuba at the time, gave the order to take care of these bastards in whatever way, in whatever form. And that was when the then Vice President, Isatunjai Saidi, gave the orders for the army to descend on the student demonstrators. The Junglers. The year 2000 saw the emergence of a special and clandestine group of security officers from various units of the armed forces and police, without any legal basis for its operations, and with the sole task of repressing or eliminating anyone considered to be a critic of or perceived threat to Yahya Jammeh and his administration. The men were loyal to Jammeh and took and carried out orders directly from him without questions, irrespective of whether the orders were wrong or unlawful. The third squad became known as the patrol team, later called Junglers. They were also referred to as the Black Plague from the dark fatigues they wore during operation. Their killing modus operandi included brutal torture, killing by suffocating with plastic bags around the heads of their victims, and close-range gunshots. In some cases, the bodies of their victims were dismembered as per instructions from Yahya Jammeh. The remains after the killings were often buried deep in the forest, some allegedly in the Casamas regions of southern Senegal. Sana Manjang and Solo Bojang were the most feared junglers, while Suleiman Solbaji was alleged to be the overall commander of the junglers after the demise of Tumbul Tamba in 2007 from a mysterious illness.
Why man bokon na si ñu demone si location ñu receive Toumani.
At this point, I cannot recall what locations they were, but I was one of the people who went and received Toumani.
Man la.
It was me.
Pasane. Captain Modu Jaju, alias Rambo.
Captain Modu Jaju, alias Rambo.
And Sekuba Jaju.
And who in the NIA handed him over to you?
Wax dëgg yàlla mënuma fàttaliku kii kan la nag. Bi mu ñëwee moom ak Captain Modu Jaju ñoo wax.
To be frank, I cannot recall who it was that handed over these
individuals. Foog naa ñoom demoon nañ ba tollu si ñaar o ñetti nit daal.
The people that handed over gave these individuals to Captain Jaju. They were about 2 or 3.
When we received
these individuals, we sat him.
And which one of them was this?
Toumani Diallo.
When we received Toumani Diallo, we sat him in the vehicle.
Benen group binyo receive the other person.
Another group came and received the other person.
Who were members of that group?
Bobu Sambula, Suleiman Sambu.
That group was Suleiman Sambu.
Lieutenant Michael Jata. WO2 Fansu Nyabali. The fourth guy, Malik Manga, as the driver.
Yahya Jammeh and his third squad were found criminally liable by the TRRC for the killing of over 80 individuals from 2001 to the end of Jammeh's rule in 2016, with some of the findings coming from 8 junglers who confessed to these killings during their testimonies at the TRRC. Some of the assassinations, murders and extrajudicial killings associated with the junglers include the killings of Almamo Mane, Haruna Jammeh and his sister Masi Jammeh, both cousins of Yahya Jammeh. Deida Haidara, the 50-plus West African migrants. Alleged coup plotters Ndur Cham, Daba Marina, Ibu Lo, Malafikor, and Aliou Cisse. The two Gambia American businessmen, Mahmoud Cisse and Ibu Job, Baba Job, the execution of the 9 Mile 2 inmates, the abduction and summary killings of businessman Sol Ndau and former National Assembly member Mahawa Cham, and attempted murder of lawyer Usman Silla. The killing of Deida Haidara and attacks on the media and freedom of expression. On December 16, 2004, Deida Haidara, a prominent veteran journalist and co-founder and primary editor of the Point newspaper for 13 years, was gunned down and killed on his way home from work. This incident and the arrest and disappearance of Chief Ibrahim Amani in July 2006 were the most notable attacks on media practitioners and freedom of expression in the Gambia by Yahya Jammeh. However, the attacks on the media started as early as October 1994. When the media began to hold the government accountable, Yahya Jammeh started detaining journalists, calling them illegitimate sons of Africa, unpatriotic and against progress. Jammeh clamped down on the media through harsh and repressive laws that permitted the government to interfere with the media and also imposed unwarranted restrictions on published material, limiting the enjoyment of freedom of expression. 37 journalists and media practitioners were subsequently threatened, arbitrarily arrested, detained, tortured, deported, forced to go into exile, forcibly disappeared, or killed. When he came into power, President Adama Barrow pledged to reform the country, including repealing of the oppressive laws that curtailed the rights to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly, which were used on the former President Yahya Jammeh to suppress peaceful dissent. However, these laws still remain operative. The killing of the West African migrants.
Medende Martin Chere, Ghana for you come Gambia no minute survivor, Amekaye, 2005 NEC ne.
On 22nd July 2005, 67 West African migrants, including at least 2 women, stopped in Gambia on their way to Europe and were arrested by Gambian security forces. According to witnesses, amongst the migrants were more than 50 Ghanaians, 7 Nigerians, 2 Senegalese, 3 Ivorians, and 2 Togolese. Despite being unarmed and their behavior and appearance clearly indicating they were migrants, they were accused of being mercenaries, trying to overthrow the regime of Yahya Jammeh. Over 50 other migrants were then forcibly disappeared and or killed, including a Gambian national, Lamin Tunkara, who was alleged to be their agent.
My name is Isaac Menson, and I cannot bury my father. In 2005, my family received the horrifying news that my father had been killed in the Gambia whilst migrating to Europe. He was one of the Ghana 44 as it come to be referred to.
Testimonies from police officers, NIA executives, and government officials revealed that there was an extensive cover-up of the West African migrants' presence and massacre in the Gambia. Although an investigation conducted by a UN ECOWAS team in 2008 surmised that Gambia was not directly or indirectly complicit in the deaths or disappearances of the migrants in 2019. The testimony of former junglers Malik Jatta and Omar Jallo, Yankuba Sonko, and other state agents rendered the UN ECOWAS report dubious by asserting the culpability of Yahya Jammeh and various government officials in the massacre and cover-up. the fake Presidential Alternative Treatment Program. In January 2007, then President Yahya Jammeh announced to local and international media that he received a mandate from God to cure HIV, AIDS, and other diseases within 3 days. It is important to highlight that extensive research by scientists and medical professionals over the years is yet to support the existence of a cure for HIV, AIDS anywhere in the world. Dr. Tamsin Bow, then Minister of Health, was appointed director of the program, which was called the Presidential Alternative Treatment Program. Dr. Malik Njai, Chief Medical Director at the main referral hospital at the time, was part of the program during the early days. He was later replaced by Dr. Maria Tujalo. Nurses were also enlisted into the program, as well as Yahya Jammeh's relative, Ansoumana Jammeh, who assisted Dr. Mbow with the administration of the treatment of patients when Yahya Jammeh traveled. Ansoumana confessed that he had no medical training or experience. The first batch of participants were forced into the program, but many persons with the virus submitted to the program willingly, out of hope of being cured. Patients were required to stop their conventional medicine when taking Jammeh's treatment, which consisted of massages, prayers, and the consumption of various concoctions. They were made to lie down naked with just a towel tied on while being massaged everywhere, including their private parts. During their treatment, these patients were subjected to unlawful detention, torture, sexual violence, and inhuman and degrading treatment, and some were at one point accused of being witches by Yahya Jammeh. People who challenged the veracity of the PATP, including senior United Nations officials, were sanctioned. Patients who left the program had to go back to conventional treatment to survive. According to the TRRC, patients suffered serious health issues, and approximately 31 people died as a result of the fake treatment. One witness believes that some of the people died from the stigma rather than from HIV. In May 2018, AIDS Free World assisted 3 survivors in filing a legal action against Yahya Jammeh in the High Court of the Gambia. They are seeking financial damages for harm suffered and a declaration from the High Court that their human rights were violated. The 2009 Witch Hunt Exercise. The witch hunt exercise ordered by Yahya Jammeh started in 2009. Hundreds of mostly elderly men and women were abducted from various villages in the West Coast and North Bank regions, including the villages of Sintet, Jambur, Makumbaya, Essew, and Bara, and disappeared. It was alleged that Jammeh wanted to test Kube Jaro, a local hallucinogenic plant, as a drug to create a new drug trade, and used the people accused of witchcraft as guinea pigs to study the effect. Yahya Jammeh brought witch hunters believed to be from Guinea-Conakry or Mali to treat the witches and wizards, assisted by state security, alcalos, local police officers, as well as green boys and girls, a vigilante group mobilized to intimidate and harass citizens on Yahya Jammeh's behalf. The campaign was led and directed by Lieutenant Colonel Solo Bojang, a senior member of the Junglers Hit Squad. Some of the victims were taken to Baba Job's compound in Kololi, while others were taken to one of former President Jammeh's houses in Kanilai. The victims were made to drink a concoction believed to have been made from Kube Jaro and forced to bathe naked or semi-naked in an unidentified liquid. Most were beaten, tortured, and subjected to degrading and inhuman conditions. Some of the women were raped by the soldiers and green boys. It was reported that a cameraman was present and recording the exercise for Yahya Jammeh. More than 41 victims died after their ordeal. In addition to having serious health problems, survivors are facing a lifetime stigma which will continue on for generations. The social bond in most of their families have crumbled, and their families are stigmatized within their community. The TRRC, in its final report, recommended the prosecution of Solo Bojang and Sehu Jallo for leading roles they played in the witch hunting exercise, and Yahya Jammeh, Solo Bojang, and Seku Jallo were also recommended for prosecution for the murder and manslaughter of the more than 41 witch hunt victims who died from drinking toxic concoctions. Attack on religious freedom. The attacks on religious freedom by the state and state agents, with the support of the Supreme Islamic Council, culminated in the declaration of the Gambia as an Islamic Republic in December 2015, a move that threatened the Christians and other minority religions in the country.
The president of the Gambia has declared his country an Islamic Republic. Yahya Jammeh claims the move marks a break with the colonial past and was in line with Gambia's religious identity and values. Over 90% of Gambians are Muslim. Jammeh has said that no dress code would be imposed and people of other religions would be allowed to practice freely.
Prior to that, Yahya Jammeh, aided and abetted by the Gambia Supreme Islamic Council and local government authorities, began the persecution and oppression of various religious communities. The Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat were subject of harassment, including denial to bury their dead in the Muslim cemetery, and faced attacks on their community as early as 1997. Witnesses testified to the arrests, detentions, torture and persecution of imams for preaching a brand of Islam or views that were different from that espoused by religious leaders close to Yahya Jammeh, and in 2009, a Digal sect of Kirmor Ali were forced into exile in neighboring Senegal, where until at the time of release of this video, they continue to live as refugees despite a ruling from the Gambian High Court in October 2017 that the actions of the state against the Ndigal were illegal and ordering that the followers of the sect be allowed to return to their settlement. Sexual and gender-based violence. On 31st October 2019, Fatou A. Jallow, also known as Tufa Jallow, a former July 22nd Beauty and Scholarship Pageant winner, testified in front of the TRRC that she was raped by Yahya Jammeh in 2015 during an all-night Quran recitation, Gamo, at State House. While this was the most sensational testimony on sexual and gender-based violence suffered by victims during the 22 years of dictatorship in the Gambia, it was by no means the first or only case. 4 other witnesses testified about the rapes they suffered at the hands of some of the most senior persons of the regime, including then Minister of Interior Usman Sonko and former President Yahya Jammeh. It was revealed that Yahya Jammeh, with help from state employees, used state institutions and resources to put in place a system for sexual abuse, assault and exploitation of women and young vulnerable girls, sometimes called the protocol girls. Jammeh also abused power to have others brought abroad for sex. Other witnesses also testified to having been subjected to torture and rape or threatened with gang rape while in detention by security officials during the Yahya Jammeh regime. Similarly, other witnesses' testimonies across all other themes disclosed the exploitation and harassment of female state employees, particularly prison officers, are regularly subjected to. Sexual and gender-based violence experts who testified described the extensive nature of SGBV in the country and detailed the devastating medical, economical, and psychosocial consequences it has on survivors, their families, and their communities, as well as how influential people in the Gambia are protected by the culture of silence. It is important to highlight that sexual and gender-based violations described by witnesses during their testimonies were frequently and notably referred to as alleged by the legal counsels and other TRRC staff, which was not the case when witnesses discussed topics such as torture, arbitrary arrest, and forced disappearance, etc. Some witnesses were prevented from naming persons accused of sexual violence or asked to refer to those accused of enabling a system by using numbers, which was also not the case for testimonies on other violations. The TRRC, in its final report and recommendations, recommended the prosecution of Yahya Jammeh for the rape of Fatou Jallow Tufa and 2 other protected witnesses. Usman Sonko was also recommended to be prosecuted for raping Binta Jamba, a 15-year-old in Lamindaranka, and 1 protected witness, as well as the harassment of 5 female prison officers of the Gambia Prison Services. April 16, 2016 UDP demonstration. Ibrahim Solo Sandeng, the organizing secretary of the United Democratic Party, was committed to electoral reforms in the Gambia. He was said to have told his family, "If I am supposed to be the sacrificial lamb for Gambia to be free, then so be it." On April 14, 2016, he led a demonstration against the country's repressive electoral laws. These demonstrations were violently dispersed by PIU officers and about 27 UDP supporters, including Solo Sandeng, Nogo Njai, Fatoumata Jawara, Fatou Kamara, Modungom, Lamin Sonko, and Kafu Bayo, were arrested and taken into custody. They were subjected to various forms of torture and maltreatment. Solo Sandeng was severely tortured to death and his body secretly buried in Tanje. Others, like Nogo Njai, were permanently injured for life. The death of Solo Sandeng sparked a protest by the UDP, and again, the PIU descended on the protesters, beating them and arresting about 21 UDP supporters, including the Secretary General of the United Democratic Party, Usainu Dabo. On May 9, 2016, several UDP supporters who attended the trial of Usainu Dabo and the other arrested UDP members were accosted by PIU officers, severely beaten, and about 40 of them were arrested and detained at the PIU, including Kadi Samate and her infant daughter, baby Aisha. All arrestees were charged and the leaders were denied bail by the court. They were subsequently convicted but were released after the 2016 elections. The TRRC found Yaya Jammeh, Yankuba Baji, then director of the National Intelligence Agency, Sheikh Omar Jeng, and Tamba Masire, responsible for the torture and persecution of the UDP supporters in April 2016. The violations highlighted in this video are not all the atrocities that were committed by Jammeh and his accomplices during his 22-year authoritarian rule. The scale of the crimes committed are enormous. There were many others, including the killing of about 24 people between 1994 and 2016 by Yaya Jammeh's heavily armed convoy that drove at dangerous speeds. More than a dozen people are living with serious and permanent injuries as a result of the accident caused by Yaya Jammeh's convoy. Some were beaten just for failing to stand up while the convoy was passing. Arbitrary arrests and detentions, usually under inhuman and degrading conditions, were also the order of the day during Jammeh's rule. Enforced disappearances and torture were rampant, and many Gambians had to flee the country for their lives voluntarily or involuntarily. We wish to highlight that the TRRC only heard a fraction of the voices of those victimized whose fundamental rights were trampled upon. Some crimes were also not within the Commission's mandate and therefore were not heard. For example, the Beach Boys, who lost everything when their beach bars and restaurants were demolished overnight. These were men who struggled for years with their families to invest in their business, only to see them torn to rubble in a few short hours without due process. Gambians lived in fear and perpetrators lived in impunity. On November 25, 2021, the TRRC submitted its final report and recommendations to President Adama Barrow, as required by the TRRC Act. The report was made public on December 24, 2021. The final report summarized the findings of the Commission in a 17-volume set of documents that includes 265 sets of recommendations. Yaya Jammeh, members of the AFPRC junta, the junglers, and over 30 others were deemed to bear the greatest responsibility for the myriad of crimes and human rights violations uncovered by the Commission and were recommended for prosecution. Recommendations were also made to ban some people from office, for legal and institutional reforms to be undertaken, for various training and capacity building, especially for the security forces to be conducted, including human rights education. The Commission also proposed recommendations for reparations, reconciliation, and amnesty. 6 months later, on May 25, 2022, the Attorney General and Minister of Justice released the much-anticipated white paper, which presented the government's position on the 265 recommendations that were proposed by the TRRC, as well as its implementation plan.
Out of 265 recommendations made by the Commission, the government made only 2 outright rejections, leaving the rest of the recommendations earmarked for implementation in one form or another. An acceptance rate of over 95% or more. All recommendation is unprecedented in the history of truth commissions, and I am convinced that we now have a clear roadmap towards reconciliation, justice, reparation, and ensuring non-recurrence. The TRRC report, by and large, sets out in much detail. The release of the white paper today is by no means the end of this process, but the beginning of the most important phase, which is the implementation. Irrespective of your stance, whether as a government, political party, CSO, media organization, or victim-led organization, we are all stakeholders in this process, and as such must work together in ensuring an effective and successful implementation of the recommendations. The slogan "Never Again" summarizes our dreams and aspirations for the future, but we must ensure that it does not only remain as a slogan, but it's translated into concrete action. The implementation will therefore be transparent and inclusive, with clear timelines and measurable outcomes. Rest assured that government is fully committed to implementation of as outlined in the white paper. We have been given a unique opportunity to change the trajectory of our dear nation, and posterity will judge us by our actions. Now that we have the white paper, it is important that implementation begins in earnest.
The statement made by the ministry during the release was by and large reassuring to victims. The historic milestone is a good beginning to the next chapter, the right step in the right direction, and a huge step towards healing for victims and Gambians. Victims are optimistic, albeit cautiously, as we anxiously await prompt and transparent implementation of the recommendations with hopes of a better tomorrow through a strong and resilient society.